Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Really wonderful seeing you all here. Welcome. My name is Ravi Belamkonda. I'm the provost and the chief academic officer here at The Ohio State University. Really great, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you for the inaugural Diversity of Thought seminar series here at The Ohio State University. Wouldn't be possible, this event, without the leadership of Trevor Brown, the dean of the Glenn College, Kent from our law school, and Lee Strang, where I saw Lee here, and Lee Strang from the Chase Center. So thank you for your leadership. This is the first of many, we think. I'll just share a couple of reflections. Many think of The Ohio State University as an athletics powerhouse, and that we are. But it has been my joy to get to know the academic powerhouse that The Ohio State University is. We are the home of Nobel Prize winners, winners of the Japan Prize, countless inventions are curing diseases, including cancer. We are an academic powerhouse. And it's not just that we have amazing faculty and thought leaders. It is because we are unafraid of the hard, complex questions that the world poses us. And this evening ultimately is about that, our fearless exploration of complexity, of nuance, and the seeking of truth by questioning, debating, encountering beliefs that we may or may not be familiar with. So that is at the heart, the rationale for this Diversity of Thought seminar series. Can we have a forum where we're unafraid to ask hard questions and do so in a way that enhances our learning? And how does diversity of thought enhance learning? I'm a neuroscientist on the side when I'm not provost, and our brains are essentially prediction machines. They make models of the world and how the world works. And so we all have one of those models in our heads as we walk around. And when we encounter something that doesn't fit the model, we have for a moment an opportunity to be curious about that. And we have a choice. When we encounter something that doesn't fit the model, doesn't fit what we think the truth is or how the world works, we have a little glimpse, an opening, to either be curious and investigate further, as I hope we will this evening, or we could say, that cannot possibly be true, and dismiss it and go on, which abrogates the opportunity for learning. And so that's what excites me about this seminar series. And we have today two distinguished guests that I'll let Trevor introduce. We'll have opportunities to encounter, I am sure, at least one thought or idea or belief that we perhaps didn't entertain, and hence create opportunities for us to learn and grow. And that's the salience and importance of diversity of thought generally, and this seminar series as a representation of that part of what makes our university a great academic powerhouse, fearlessly seeking the truth wherever the answers lead us. So with that, let me turn things over to Trevor Brown, who I have the pleasure of working with every day as in his SVP, Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs role, but just a wonderful colleague, and I think we're in for a treat. Let's just give them a round of applause, and then we'll...
So good evening, everyone. Just a quick mic check. Can everybody hear me okay as I look across the room? Okay, great. A few sort of housekeeping business preamble here, just to get everybody level set. As the provost just said, we are really, really excited to have an engaging conversation about topics over the coming years that perhaps we have difference of opinion about. And one of the things we hope to do with this series is show those differences, but also model how to have a civil and engaged conversation as we do that. So to that end, and this may feel impolite, but sometimes in events like these and in this moment in time, there are people that have real passions about some of the things that we might talk about tonight and in other settings. But we hope that you can keep those passions under control. But if for some reason you feel the need, I may ask you in the midst of this event to share those passions someplace else. And so if we get to that, I may from the stage say, thank you very much, but there's a place and a time for that, and then we may have to ask someone to leave if that were to occur. But very hopeful that we're able to model and engage in civil discourse here. And to that end, many of you, I hope, had the opportunity as you came in to share some questions that you might like to have asked during this session at a later time this evening. My friend Lisa Frericks is going to hand me some of those questions if you did that, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. The other thing, just as a bit of housekeeping, this event is being recorded, and we hope to distribute it soon after. So to that end, please refrain from any personal use of your video or audio capture devices. Please cease and desist those. And as a good reminder, like when going to the movie, you could reach in your pocket right now and turn them off so we aren't interrupted. Okay, enough with the housekeeping. So I want to introduce two thought leaders who are joining us, who we've invited today to engage in this evening's conversation. The first, to my far left, your right, is Ross Douthat, conservative political analyst, author, and op-ed columnist for the New York Times. Douthat joined the New York Times in 2009 as the newspaper's youngest ever op-ed columnist. He writes on Tuesdays and Sundays for the paper, covering American politics, religion, pop culture, and intellectual life, and he is the film critic for the National Review. He's also a co-founder of the New York Times podcast, The Argument, and now his own New York Times podcast, Interesting Times. He's also an author, having published numerous books, most recently, Believe, Why Everyone Should Be Religious. He's a non-resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a media fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America, and writer-in-residence at the Elm Institute. Please join me in welcoming Ross to Ohio State University.
Thank you.
Next, to my immediate left is, I'd like to welcome Dr. Michael Shermer. Dr. Shermer is the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine and formerly a monthly columnist for Scientific American. Like Ross, he is the host of his own podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and is the author of numerous books, including his new book, Truth, What It Is, How to Find It, and Why It Still Matters. He regularly contributes opinion editorials, essays, and reviews to publications like the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, Science, Nature, and has been an invited guest on shows such as The Colbert Report, 2020, Dateline, and others. He's been involved in numerous documentaries and was the co-host and co-producer of the Family Channel television series Exploring the Unknown. He's been a college educator since 1979, teaching at Occidental College, Glendale College, and Claremont Graduate University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Shermer. Okay, so tonight, what we wanted to do was have a conversation about civic life and the role of religion. And so, some truth in advertising. This will not be a conversation about whether God exists or if science offers a more persuasive case for the origins of human life. Instead, what we want to do tonight is seek to understand the past, current, and future impact of religion on civic life. And by civic life, think of that as a community with ties across divisions and a shared purpose and a sense of citizenship. So here in the United States, Democratic Republic, founded on the rule of law and a tradition of civic engagement that has historically been celebrated. Think de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And the basic overarching questions that we're going to try and get into tonight is, what is the role of religion in establishing and maintaining the social fabric, our system of laws, our process of identifying public problems and tackling them with policies? Maybe the role is essential, maybe it's superfluous, and maybe it's harmful. That's what we want to talk through this evening. So, now let's start the conversation. And to start, I'm going to ask each of you a question, just sort of to set your ideas out on the table, and then we'll get into more of a back and forth. So I'm going to start with you, Michael. In one of your many books, The Moral Arc, you make a case that, that post-Enlightenment, science and reason, not religion, have bent the moral arc of the universe towards justice. And you highlight the remarkable moral progress in the United States and around the globe. Decline in interpersonal violence, rise of women's rights, the absence of nuclear conflict post-World War II, and you make the argument that moral enlightenment is driven by science and reason. So I want to put a different framing. So that was a very positive framing. I want to talk about the social fabric and the degree to which we are connected. So this is perhaps most popularized by a social scientist, Robert Putnam, who wrote a book, Bowling Alone, in the 1990s that many of you are probably familiar with, that began to chart out through data that we are more divided, less connected, and more polarized, and this has only accelerated over the last several decades. So the question to start is, what is the role of science and reason in this decline in civic engagement? And if science and reason have had such a profound impact on moral progress, why not on social connectedness and our shared humanity?
Interesting question. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Came all the way from the People's Republic of California to be here with you all. I'm not sure who's the heretic here, you or me. Yeah, so my general argument is that even if you can establish that much of the United States or some of the values of the Western civilization over the centuries has some founding in the Judeo-Christian worldview, in fact, what really drove the major moral revolutions was not religion per se, it was secular-based arguments in rights, sort of natural rights and rights, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and so on. And the gay rights revolution is a nice example because it happened recently enough in this century, and the most opposed to this were the religious people. And after 2015, when it became the law of the land, then most religious people said, okay, never mind. And God loves everybody and so forth, and it pretty much died within a few years. That happened much faster than women's rights, which took around a century, and civil rights, which took longer still. But my point is that I think all those came about for secular reasons, and that religion got on board after that. So you'll see people like the Quakers and the Episcopalians and a handful of people that supported the abolition of slavery, for example. And Christians will say, well, what about that guy? Wilberforce and this Quaker and so on. They did that. It's like, that's true. But their primary opponents were their fellow Christians who said, oh, no, God put the black people in Africa and he put the yellow people in Asia. That's the way it is. Here's the Old Testament passage, and you can read the preaching sermons from 19th century America, Southern America, where the preachers all made the case, this is the best thing for these poor black people. We're going to save their souls and so on and so forth. They made all these justifications that nobody today would ever make. And so what happened? Well, the religion didn't change. Nobody reinterpreted this passage and said, oh, this is what it actually means. It was that we all had our moral compass moved. We expanded our moral sphere to include more people, and that's gotten reinforced over the years. That's my main argument.
Okay, Ross, I'm sure you have thoughts and potential retorts, and we're going to give you that opportunity here in a little bit. But like I said to Michael, I want to give just you the opportunity to lay out some basic arguments. So in several episodes of your podcast, you've brought on guests to help listeners understand the current state of religiosity in the country. So sometimes it's a conversation about decline. Fewer Americans are formally attending church in the conventional sense. Other times it's about a plateau, meaning there are a certain percentage of Americans who remain religious, but that percentage is not growing. So in my previous question with Michael, I anchored that to the erosion of our connectedness as citizens. So I want to give you the same anchoring. What's the relationship between the decline or stasis in religiosity and the decline in civic engagement? Is it correlation, or do you think there's a causal relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, I should also say thank you all for being here tonight. It's a great pleasure to be here. And in spite of all of the admonitions about good behavior, if any of you want to storm the stage and carry me off on your shoulders to celebrate victory and argument, I'll be okay with it. The Ohio State University, however, will not, so I strongly discourage it.
Thank you for that.
Yes, you're right. I put that in at the end to be to be safe. So yeah, I think that pretty clearly there is a kind of dynamic feedback loop in American culture over the last couple of generations, where religion and the decline of religion is one of the forces implicated in the erosion of social capital, the erosion of community, the erosion of sort of common bonds. I think it's too simple to say, that there's some sort of one-way causal arrow where America became more secular and therefore people also stopped bowling together and, started hating each other for political reasons and so on. It's more that there's just a whole tangle of forces, some of them social, some of them technological, a lot of them technological these days, pushing the culture in a more individualistic and ultimately kind of atomized direction. And in that landscape, the decline of church-going and religious affiliation is part of the story, but also part of a story where there's a kind of, philosophical and theological component too that isn't present in bowling leagues, right? Like, one thing that institutional religion supplies various forms of social capital. That's obviously true, but it also supplies a kind of, you might almost call it like existential capital, in a way that not every community organization does, where it doesn't just anchor you in your community, it also anchors you in the universe. And it gives you a story about what human beings are, what you are supposed to do, what is expected of you, whether you are intended or loved, whether you even exist at all as a coherent self, or whether you're just a collection of neurons firing in the brain, whether you have free will or not. And to Michael's point about arguments between religious people, obviously religious people have done a perfectly good job arguing among ourselves over the centuries and millennia about some of these questions. Do you actually have free will? What are God's actual commandments, and so on? What is encompassed? So it's not, again, it's too simple to say, there used to be this simple religious answer to all of these questions, and now that's slipped away. But what I do think is true is that there used to be a more powerful set of institutional and intellectual forces in American life that helped give people a strong sense of their place in the cosmos and the meaningfulness of human life. And as religion and religious institutions have weakened, there's been a kind of sort of extra effect to their weakening that's stronger than the effect of the decline of a bowling league, where it isn't just that people are spending less time in community with their neighbors, or maybe ending up sharing a pew with someone they don't agree with politically. We can get into all of those issues, but the more profound reality is that people are just generally less existentially anchored in a society where religion has entered into decline, and you have a lot of different forces and worldviews that are trying to sort of step into the breach. I don't think, some of those forces are explicitly religious, some of them are more political and are trying to sort of substitute a kind of secular political narrative for the narratives of religion. But I think at the very least, we can argue a bit about whether it's possible to have a secular substitute for that kind of existential grounding. But I suspect that Michael would agree with me that we don't at the moment have some sort of secular political consensus about how human beings should be existentially grounded. And as long as that's the case, yeah, there is a kind of psychological unmooring, I think, that has accompanied the decline of organized religion in the U.S. Yes.
Please.
So by way of example, especially since we're not debating, we're just talking.
We're just talking, yeah.
In the 90s when we first started Skeptic magazine, so it's a science magazine, but there's also humanist magazines that deal with political issues. And so one of the things they did, that whole movement, was we're going to create a secular church. We're going to have like a building in every city that you can go to as a secularist, atheist, whatever. And so I went to a bunch of these for fun. It didn't really do it for me, but it was like, we're going to sing hymns to Newton, and you get up and give a testimonial about how you lost your religion, and then you light the candle to Darwin. And, it was like, this is not flying for me. And I thought maybe some of these people need this. I don't know. There's like humanist groups in New York. There's those secular Jewish groups that do that. I forget what they're called now, but
ethical culture.
Yeah, the ethical culture. Yeah. They've never grown much. They're tiny, and none of this ever happened. And it's possible that, like it's more like a bowling league than a church. It's like it does not fulfill existential answers. Maybe you get those from somewhere else, something like that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. That could be why that happened or didn't happen.
Let's unpack some of this. And you did exactly what I hoped you'd do. You began to sort of lay out your beliefs. And so I want to start talking a little bit about belief and faith and trust. So there are all sorts of observations and experiences and phenomenon that we experience that just can't be explained. And both religion and science have explanations for the unexplained, as well as processes for resolving uncertainty. So both religion and science also require faith, belief, and trust in that process of inquiry. How fundamentally different are science and religion in cultivating belief and faith?
Me? Oh.
Sure.
Well, so here's an example I use in my truth book. So you're in the pews, and the preacher says, the church has a parking lot in the back. Well, you can go see for yourself if there's a parking lot there or not. But when the preacher says, God is 3 in 1, 1 in 3, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost or whatever, the average listener is going to be like, well, okay, you can't go check. That's what we believe. That's
not
what
immediately.
Yeah,
Maybe
you might be able to
eventually.
check later. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. And I may end up in the other place where Sagan and all the good guys are. Anyway, but so I think, what do we mean by believe? There's different kinds of belief. I accept it because I've seen it with my own eyes, or I trust the institutions. Like the example I used, the 2020 election, was it rigged? Well, I never checked. I didn't go to these polling stations to see with my own eyes. I trusted that the Attorney General, Bill Barr, lifelong Republican, and the Department of Justice had the resources. I trusted them, right? In the Chinese spy balloon, it's not like the UFO videos that are grainy in video. There it is. It's clear. Everybody saw it. It was covered. Everybody said it was real. I never saw it myself because I'm in Southern California. It was north. But I trust that, right? So I think most of us have beliefs that are based on trust in institutions. So when the church says, we're Catholic and this is what we believe, or we're Episcopalian and that's what we believe, if you're a believer, you just go, yeah, okay, whatever. I don't really check those things myself. But if it's something you can see for yourself, the parking lot in the back or not, well, you can check that. So I think people put them in these different compartments, different bins. Religious truths are different from empirical scientific truths, and I think most people separate those.
Ross?
Yeah, I think of religion and modern Western science. I shouldn't say Western science, modern science, right? That was originally Western, now is global. I think of them as kind of cousins who have a complicated relationship, where I think Michael is absolutely right that there's a kind of fundamental empiricism built into the scientific method that is different from what is happening when a religion makes claims about revelation or about doctrine. It's not completely different. The religious claims are not supposed to exist purely in the realm of faith and trust. Certainly in my own tradition, Roman Catholicism, they're supposed to be compatible with reason. But most of the major religions of the Western world have a component where you are basically saying, this is something that we believe to be true for this reason or that reason, and it's not going to be, we're not going to offer you sort of empirical testing in laboratory that will prove the doctrine of the Trinity to your satisfaction. The doctrine of the Trinity exists at the end of a longer chain of sort of claims whose plausibility you have to assess, figures in whom you have to decide whether or not to put your trust, institutions that you have to decide whether or not to trust, and so on. At the same time, the fundamental claim that religion, the religious perspective, makes about the world is a claim that is, I think, essential to the development and operation of modern science. And that claim is basically that the world is reasonable, intelligible, and made in such a way that we should expect to be able to understand it. Now, again, not every religion makes that claim, but let's say many of the major world religions make a version of that claim. That is a claim that is itself the foundation of the entire edifice of Western science. keep saying Western, the entire edifice of modern science, right, that assumes that you don't need to approach the world with radical skepticism or total uncertainty, that you can trust that the set of natural laws that you discover one day will still be operational the next day, and that you should expect a kind of process of discovery to be an unfolding process, where one discovery builds on another, where the world reveals its secrets to you almost as if those secrets were created for you to discover them in the first place. And that is the thing I think that science and religion do fundamentally have in common, as against certain more sort of purely skeptical conceptions of the human place in the universe. They both share an assumption that the universe is made for us and is made to yield to us and can be understood by human beings because we have capacities that are in some way connected to the nature of reality itself. Now, the sort of more secular and atheistic versions of science and the scientific project might dispute elements of that formulation. Certainly, they dispute me saying that, you know, the universe was made for us. It wasn't made, right? We can't know it was made, and so on. But I think fundamentally, actually, that even sort of the most formally atheistic and secular forms of science do depend on that assumption. Your confidence, not just that the scientific method has worked up to this point, but that it will continue to keep working, that it won't just hit some sort of wall where our, you know, poor, primitive, ape-brain comprehension can't go any further. That confidence that science works is connected to religious ideas about the intelligibility of reality and its fundamental order, and just a basic link. You know, one way to look at the religious perspective is basically that it says, you know, human beings have access to two things, mind and matter. You have the direct experience of mind, and you have the material experience of matter. And the religious perspective is basically to say that mind is probably primary and matter is probably secondary. And the entire scientific project and all of its success is much more to be expected in a cosmos where mind comes first and orders matter in such a way that mind can understand it.
Ross, you just solved the hard problem of consciousness.
I did, yes. Right here, right now.
That's supposed to be not solvable. Consciousness first, everything after that. Okay, so
Please.
So a couple of just quick responses on that. So in truth, I make a distinction between sort of internal personal truths. This is my truth. This is what I experienced. You know, I love my wife, whatever. You know, you don't know because you're not me. And then external objective truths. I can point to it. You know, look, right there. See, you see it? Yeah, okay. So you see it, and you see it, and you see it. But maybe half of you don't see it, so maybe I'm hallucinating, and you are too. Whatever. At some point, we got to know, you know, is there some way to get at it? So I tell the story I called Sagan's Dragon, which he told in Demon Haunted World. I have a dragon in my garage. Would you like to see it? You go, yeah, okay. I thought those were mythological, but this guy's got one. Shermer's got a dragon. So I open my garage. You look around. There's a couple of bicycles and paint cans and a ladder. And there's no dragon. I go, okay, this is an invisible dragon. Oh, it's an invisible dragon. Yeah. Okay, how about we sprinkle some flour on the ground, and then when the invisible dragon walks around, we'll see the footprints. And I say, well, you see, this invisible dragon hovers above the ground about a foot. It's levitating. Oh, okay. Well, how about we get one of those thermometers they use during COVID? You know, they point at people's foreheads, and we can get the outline of the dragon from the body heat. Well, I say, you see, this is a cold-blooded dragon. It doesn't give off any body heat. Well, what about the fire? Oh, no, it's cold fire. Okay, what's the difference between a cold fire, cold-blooded, levitating, invisible dragon, and no dragon at all? Now, if you say, but I feel the presence of the dragon. I feel the love of the dragon. Okay, that's an internal, subjective truth for you. I can't test that. I have no way of knowing if that's true or not. So I would put more religious claims in that bin. It doesn't make them false. It's true for you. So, Ross, when you write a book called Believe, okay, I'm good with that. And you should be religious too. Hang on. I should believe that? You've now made that move from subjective, this is true for me, to and it's true for you too, and here's my arguments. Okay, the moment you do that, then I'm free to say, okay, let's see what your evidence is. And then we're moved into the bin of empirical truths, right? So, and then last point. I make a distinction between these empirical scientific truths in that bin. And then I put in religion, I've kind of broken from my fellow atheists and said, there's something to these religious stories that's true. They're like great literature, great mythology, great religious stories. They have a deeper truth. That they happen or not is beside the point. So I used the story of Jonah and the great fish, the whale. Jonah's in the whale for 3 days, and the whale spits him out on this other land where he delivers the message. Okay, if you're asking, like a lot of my fellow atheists, how does a person live inside the belly of a fish for 3 days? You've missed the point. The 3 days, by the way, is very, very symbolic, like Jesus in the tomb. Anyway, I don't think it happened at all. I think it's just a story with a deeper moral homily behind it. And that's the deep truth, like great literature. These stories didn't really exist. There's no Middle Earth in J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, although I'm told...
Hey now. Hey now.
I'm told New Zealand may be the...
In the multiverse, Michael.
All right, I'll give you the multiverse. I know that sounds like bullshit, but okay. Anyway, and most Christians I try this out on with the new book, they go, yeah, okay, I'm with you on that. But when I get to the resurrection, they're not vibing this. They're like, hang on, that had to have really happened for us. And I said, why can't it be like a religious truth, a mythological truth? It represents something, forgiveness and starting over, being born again, redemption, and so forth. But they say no. And that here are the reasons we believe in the resurrection. There's whole books about this. The 3 women were there, the tomb was empty, the post-death apparitions, and all this stuff. To which I say, well, if the evidence is so good, why don't Jews believe it? They believe the same God you believe in. They believe in the same book, at least the Old Testament. And they even believe there'll be a Messiah. They just don't think that the prophecy in the Old Testament said the Messiah would be this nobody who got crucified. He'd be a champion warrior who overturns the Romans and creates a new triumphant civilization, right? And that's not what happened.
How are the Romans doing?
Yes, there was. Okay, all right.
Ross, do you have some responses?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get us. I don't want to pull us too far from sort of civil society questions, but I guess I would say that there's, from my point of view, the religious perspective makes a couple of different claims, right? It says, on the one hand, there's a set of claims that religious people hold that are accessible to reason, and that a reasonable skeptic you should be able to at least argue with them about and partially persuade them. So I'll try and play with Michael's dragon. So I don't know if any of you have seen it. There's this exchange between Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins about dragons, where they have a conversation, and Peterson is very into a religious perspective that's similar, I think, to the one you suggest, where religion encodes these profound truths, and you're missing the point if you argue about the physical reality of this or that. And Dawkins just gets more and more frustrated by this, right? It's but surely we can both agree that the dragons are not actually real. And Peterson says something like,
that's good.
Richard, the dragons are more real than you and me. That's not what I'm going to argue. I think this will be an imperfect analogy, but I'm going to try and play with it. I think the religious person basically is in the position of someone who believes themselves to be inhabiting a building built by a dragon, and thinks that the dragon exists, as you say, is invisible, right? Is not existing in this order of reality, but is accessible in various ways. And so the religious person says, come into my garage and, look at all these various things that only a dragon would have done. I don't know what this is why the metaphor doesn't work exactly, but maybe there's some paintings of beautiful scales on the walls, and maybe there's some things over here that, some inscriptions written in what we, certainly seems like dragon language or something, right? I mean, this is basically, again, sort of trying to play with the metaphor and say that basically the religious person thinks that there are good reasons to look at the world in which we find ourselves and think that it is not accidental, but in fact shaped and made by some kind of conscious being. That's part of the argument. Then the religious person also says, Michael, it might be that, the dragon will speak to you, right? if you come participate in our strange dragon rituals.
Yes.
And this is part of the religious invitation is to a kind of subjective experience, but the religious claim is that this experience is available to a lot of people, right? And one of the reasons that religion persists, and even under conditions of sort of official secularism or official disenchantment, is that lots and lots of people have those experiences, right? And they aren't just sort of vibes that people feel when they look at, the dragon scale or something. There's a, fascinating and sometimes bewildering array of experiences associated with serious religious practice and serious religious belief. Now, do they happen to everyone? No, they do not. I am not personally a particularly intense religious experiencer, and I could not guarantee that, if Michael Shermer attended Pentecostalist healing services, every Saturday and Sunday for 16 years, that he would, encounter the Holy Spirit. I can't guarantee you that. But it's not as simple as the religious person is saying, I'm feeling something subjective and therefore you should submit to it. The religious person is saying, these experiences are part of the constitutive elements of reality. A lot of people have these experiences. Any theory of what's going on in the world has to reckon with those experiences. So those are a couple points. The last thing I'd say, though, just to pull us back toward the political, is I think a key line of difference here is one of the basic religious claims is that is quite relevant for the ordering and history of the United States of America, is that there is a set of things that you can't inherently prove empirically that are nonetheless moral truths about the universe, right? That are the rights. The Declaration of Independence starts talking about rights, and where do the rights come from? They come from God, right? Now, the Jeffersonian God might be different from the Pentecostalist God, but they're coming from some kind of supreme being. And the religious question then, sort of echoing down to our own controversies, is can you have a society that is organized around moral truths that cannot be proven rigorously in a laboratory? You can't discover why it's wrong to kill someone by staring at them under a microscope, no matter how long you stare. Can you have a society ordered around those truths that doesn't think that they connect to anything in the larger architecture of the universe and just says, well, they're things that because of science and reason and fellow feeling we all agree upon among ourselves? And I'm skeptical that the answer is yes. I think Michael would say that the answer is yes. But that's sort of a particularly relevant point of disagreement, I think.
Well, Ross, thank you for doing my job
and
bringing us back to that key question. And so, I think you framed it well, and you referenced the Declaration of Independence, and we're now at the 250-year mark of this great experiment, which was rooted in I think the arguments you just made. Michael, what is your response to that? Could we have...
I have right here the Declaration of Independence from whoever that was that gave this to me. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Yeah, they're not self-evident.
What's the next line?
Yeah, all men are created
right,
equal.
Okay.
Yeah, created.
Created,
I know, okay. Yeah.
just checking.
All right, just to kind of put a bow around that, I think what Ross is after there is some ultimate epistemological questions where we hit rock bottom. I can't go any further. I might say something like the fine-tuning of the universe, and I say, oh, the multiverse. Well, I can't prove to you the multiverse exists. It's a purely mathematical, metaphysical idea. I'm told that it's a prediction based on the math, but whatever. So at some point, we just hit rock bottom. We can't go any further. That's just one step too many, like consciousness. I think it's the ground of all being or whatever. I don't know. These may be known unknowables. And maybe in centuries hence they'll figure this out or whatever. But I think we're kind of stuck with that, and you just make one leap and I make the other leap and we just go on with our lives. I think something like that, probably happens. Okay, now what was I talking about?
But how about so are the moral, the
moral
Declaration
stuff,
of Independence, right?
all right. So I actually claim, where would you rather live, North Korea or South Korea? Let's just pick a super easy one there. Everybody says, well, of course, South Korea. Why? Well, I like to be free. I'd rather have some food than be starving. I'd rather have clear water than bad water, rather be healthy than diseased, and so on. I mean, South Koreans are 4 inches taller than North Koreans on average. It's just diet, right? Their per capita GDP is like 20 times higher in South Korea than North Korea, and on and on and on. Why is that? Because they don't have a market economy, they don't have a democracy, and so on. So there, I think we could say something like democracy is objectively really better than autocracy. Now, picking the lowest hanging fruit, it's a pretty simple one, and everybody would agree, yes. And it's not random, it's not relative, it's not like, oh, I like South Korea, but maybe next year I'll like North Korea. No, you won't.
Well,
That's
I mean,
what I claim.
with the Kim family seems pretty happy
if you're Kim,
in North Korea,
okay, all
right? Well,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
but this is in fact relevant. Like, I think, yes, obviously, most people would prefer to live in a rich, late 20th, early 21st century liberal democracy than North Korea. I will grant that. But supposing democracy has only existed for a fleeting amount of time, modern democracy in human history. There are certainly people who don't like living in modern liberal democracies. There have been times and places, including in the 20th century, when they have, commanded a lot of support, and different kinds of societies have been built that have lasted for substantial periods of time, right? It seems like, if you're dropped down in the Europe of 1938, for instance, you wouldn't say, oh, it's clear everyone wants to live in a democracy. Most people in the late 1930s in Europe were convinced that either fascism or communism was the wave of the future. Is the problem, well, that they were proven wrong very quickly? Like, what's the,
Okay, but in the long run, those kinds of political systems fail because the vast majority of people do not want to be part of that. I mean, we know that most Germans were on board for a while, and then when Hitler moved to a more exterminationist anti-Semitism, most people are not on board with that. But they could not speak up because of the concentration camps, no free press, and so on. And I think in the long run, most people reject fascism and other autocracies for that very reason. It's kind of a consequentialist argument, a utilitarian argument. Anyway.
But so supposing that the liberal democracy that we're in embarks on, let's say, a mad experiment to create some kind of digital intelligence that ends up taking over the entire society.
That could never happen.
That's a crazy idea. But just work with the thought experiment for a minute, right? And delivers unparalleled wealth and plenty. But the cost of this is that all decision making is outsourced to machines and democracy dies. And everyone supports this. And I say, this would be bad. Have I lost because everyone else has gone along with the machines and entered the matrix? When do I get to say there's something wrong with this, even if everybody has sort of gone along with it for an extended period of time?
Well, if all democracy disappears, then I'm wrong. But my guess is that elections are like scientific experiments in a way, that we're going to run it for a while. These people are in power. Like, what's the right percentage of immigration? There's no right number. This party wants more, this party wants less. We're going to run the experiment. Most people want this party for now. For the next 4 years, we're going to do this, see how it goes, and then have another election. And Jefferson called this the experiment in democracy. I think that's what he meant.
But supposing that 60% of the country mistakenly decided that it would make sense to put an end to the danger of the machine dystopia by executing everyone who lives in Northern California, right?
This part
again, not something I've entertained, just a hypothetical, right? That would be wrong.
That would
for
be wrong.
Reasons independent of majority
This is the Bill
vote.
of Rights. That's why we have that. So that's the deontological Kantian
Let's get to the
argument.
why is it wrong?
Right, but
Right? What is the basis?
Well, because all right, so
for
you know
why
the
it would be wrong?
the trolley problem, right? The trolley is hurling down the tracks, and it's going to kill the 5 workers. You're at the switch. If you throw the switch, it goes out down the other track and kills the 1 worker. Almost everybody goes, yeah, I would flip the switch, kill the 1 to save the 5. All right, but you're a physician in a hospital in an OR now. You got 5 dying patients, and there's some dude out in the waiting room, just randomly sitting there, and he's super healthy. Would you sacrifice him, take his 5 organs, save the 5 people? Almost everybody goes, well, no, I would not do that. Why not? Because he has the right to bodily autonomy, and we give him that right through the Bill of Rights, and so that's why we can't live in a utilitarian
why
system.
do we do that?
Well, okay, so why do we do it? Well, we've decided. Okay, we've decided.
But why have we? Yeah, I mean, I think this is again. Look, the religious argument has, its own set of problems. But there is a clarity, I think, to being able to say you can't kill the guy in the waiting room for his organs because he is made in the image of God, and it's absolutely forbidden by the author of the universe to kill him. Now, you can still say, well, you get into like the Euthyphro problem and say, well, is it wrong because God forbids it, or does God forbid it because it's wrong? Those questions don't fully go away. But there is still, a certain sort of simplicity and relative rigor to that claim as against a kind of, well, we don't do that because we've decided that we like a society where we don't do that. There's a circularity problem to that argument, isn't there?
Okay. First, what passages in the Bible are you deriving this idea that we all have equal bodily autonomy? Second question, how come it took 18 centuries to get to the abolition of slavery after the Christian religion was laid down? And how come it took 19 centuries to get to women have the equal rights, whereas most Christians were totally on board with slaves and women being subjected to men? And so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Well, first of all, I don't think Christianity teaches exactly the principle of absolute bodily autonomy. I think we agree with that there's sort of a form of liberalism that is connected to Christianity, but is distinct, that places more emphasis on autonomy. I think the Bible teaches, that it has a pretty strong critique of various forms of unjust killing. I think that would be fair to say. But yeah, it's not teaching modern liberalism. That's certainly true. The development, why did it take Christianity X amount of time to develop X or Y moral improvement? I think it varies with the moral improvement that you're talking about. I mean, if you look at the history of slavery, in fact, Christian Europe did a pretty good job of eliminating slavery, and over the course of the arc of the Dark Ages and then the Middle Ages, and then it was subjected to the sustained temptations involved in suddenly acquiring a vast global empire. And what you saw from the 16th century onward is sort of a steady internal argument within Christianity in which the critique of slavery lost the practical argument repeatedly because people were making so much money from trading slaves, but over time won the moral and theological argument. But yes, it did take time. That's absolutely right, and what's totally fair.
What's the biblical passages that you're deriving bodily autonomy, or what are freedom, liberty?
Well, the Christian critique of slavery, again, which you can find going back to the early centuries of the church. It's just not sort of taught affirmatively that all forms of slavery are wrong for, in the beginning. But there's a Christian critique of slavery that goes back to, obviously, the New Testament and St. Paul saying, there is neither, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, you're all one in Jesus. And there's essentially, Christian culture derives certain political principles from the arguments in the New Testament, but they aren't all derived automatically. And you do absolutely have long wrangles that continue to this day and will continue. The Catholic Church has been arguing about the death penalty and will continue to argue about the death penalty for a long period of time.
Before you start quoting scripture.
I got Galatians 3:28 right here. I'm ready.
I knew that was coming.
Okay.
But I'd like to redirect back to what is the role of religion in civic life, and what should it be, right? So we can debate its history, and we just did. And
okay.
But what is its proper place in a democracy, preferred choice of many? What should be its role?
Well, I think the Constitution largely got that right. Just the freedom of religious worship. That's it. You can practice any religion you want, or no religion. Doesn't matter. These are the rules that we live by in this country. You have to follow the rules. That's it. Doesn't matter what your religion is. That seems pretty obvious and clear. And keep enforcing that. I like that.
Ross?
I think historically, the United States has had a political system that has a sort of framework of liberal neutrality that is hostile to formal establishment of religion, but it has also relied upon a kind of soft religious consensus as a ground on which different kinds of moral and political debates have been fought. And that's the reason that many reform movements in our history have been rooted in Christianity, sometimes rooted, again, as Michael said, in arguments within Christianity, where you have Christians on both sides. But down through basically the 1960s, almost all major moral cultural debates in America were litigated in moral and metaphysical language derived from a kind of soft Protestant consensus. And at a certain point, that Protestant consensus widened to encompass Americanized forms of Catholicism and Judaism. And so you get the sort of Judeo-Christian moment in the post-war era. And then you have the collapse of the Protestant mainline, a wave of secularization. And from that point on, that sort of religious common ground disappears. And Michael's absolutely right that some of the reform movements since, some of them have been religious, some of them have been irreligious, and everywhere in between. The story changes in the last 50 or 60 years. But there is, in effect, I think, an unmet demand in American society for some kind of new moral consensus and common ground to replace the old soft Protestant consensus. And you keep having forces sort of auditioning to fill that role. So the religious right basically says, well, we don't have mainline Protestantism anymore, but we can have an alliance of conservative Catholics and evangelicals and Jews and Mormons and so on, and we'll sort of achieve a similar kind of soft consensus. And that works briefly, but that doesn't really work and breaks up in the George W. Bush presidency. And then you get the era I think we've just lived through, where you have a kind of secular but sort of somewhat religious-ish form of progressivism that also speaks a kind of quasi-religious language. Instead of a great awakening, you have a great awokening, right? And that sort of auditions for the role and says, all right, this is what the moral consensus is going to be. And then people sort of rebel against that. And you might say, well, that's fine. We shouldn't have a sort of, it's a free country. It's a diverse country. You don't need a kind of moral consensus or common ground. But in fact, I think people miss it because it provides a common language in which you can have certain kinds of debates. And without that common language, you do get pretty radical forms of polarization where it's not just that people disagree, it's that they're speaking completely different moral and metaphysical language. So as a religious person, I would not ever expect to see my own particular form of Christianity established as the Church of the United States, but I would like to see a world where some form of Christianity had more cultural purchase and played some kind of centering role in American life. And I think that's compatible with the Constitution, as long as you're not forcing Michael to, attend the local Presbyterian church on Sunday.
Or believe in dragons.
Or believe in dragons. Well, that will be enforced by the power of the law.
You just moments ago said, the Constitution basically creates the framework for us to believe whatever we want to believe, whether that's belief in a higher being or belief in something else or belief in nothing at all. But Ross has just said what has eroded is a moral consensus. So what's your thought about, A, do we need a moral consensus for a strong social fabric that forms the foundation of the democracy that you celebrate? And then is the basis of that in some loose agreement about a sense of religious principles?
Maybe. This has happened a lot of times in American history before, where it turns out to be something of a moral panic, and we, kind of right the ship and go back to the way things used to be, or the pendulum swings the other way. And so we may be in the middle of one of these pendulum swings, maybe. But to grant Ross's point that if there is something like a God-shaped hole, as it's described, I don't think that's quite right, but something like that we need religion, and that bowling leagues don't fill it, or secular churches or whatever don't do the job. Something else will fill it, so maybe it's woke, progressive, DEI, trans, stuff on the far left, and maybe it's Islamism on the other side, or Project 2025, whatever, there's something's going to fill that. I don't know. I think we're in the middle of this right now. And, as Ross will tell you, our mutual friend, Ayan Hirsi Ali, she's making this case for cultural Christianity. Even Dawkins called himself a cultural Christian. I guess I would too. I guess I would agree with you that, at least, there's a foundation there to the kinds of values we hold. My friends in England, I was just there last week, they're telling me about the infusion of Islam into England. It's about 1,000 a day are coming by the boat from France. And no one will stop the boats. And these are all mostly Muslim men from Africa coming into England, changing the landscape. Now, maybe this is a moral panic. Maybe it's all going to stop in next month. Who knows? But that I will grant that there has to be some foundation for the rule of law and equal treatment under the law, equal rights for women and gays and so forth. All of that foundation that could change if we became, let's say, a Muslim country. I don't think this will happen, but the final point, this is called Popper's Paradox. Karl Popper wrote a book on the open society, and he talked about the potential problem of all the tolerant people saying we need to tolerate everybody, including the intolerant people. Then that would give the intolerant people a toehold to get the power to not tolerate the tolerant people, and pretty soon you have a society of intolerant people. Now, this hasn't happened, but it maybe could happen. I mean, it's not a crazy argument. It's the kind of thing you have to watch out for. Anyway, so I'll grant you that.
Okay, I have many questions from the audience.
We have many answers.
Okay. Outside of a supreme lawmaker, what's the absolute basis for human dignity and for moral imperatives?
Me? Oh,
you.
I get the easy questions. Well, okay, so that word dignity, that's not a constitutional word. It's not really a legal word. It's more of an emotive word. I think what we're after here is you're free to do what you want and you're treated equally under the law. That's it. By dignity, you're asking something like, I want people to respect me. Well, okay, whatever. Then do something that's respectful or something like that. That's not the kind of thing I think that you could unify as a public policy. I guess would be my response to that. I know that comes up a lot, equal dignity, it's more of a liberal thing. I think that's the wrong word. I think we're looking for something else. I just want to be treated like everybody else. If that's dignity, fine, but usually they're after something else.
Ross, any thoughts?
I agree with the premise of the question, that it's easier to establish a bunch of the foundational assumptions of modern liberal civilization if you assume a supreme lawmaker and lawgiver, and that's why even thinkers who were by no means Orthodox Christians, from John Locke through Thomas Jefferson, did just that, right? They said, all right, we have a theory of individual rights that's a break maybe with certain patterns of Christian politics before us, but we are grounding it in a conception, an order of the cosmos. In that sense, maybe there's some similarity to what I was saying about science, right? That liberalism and Christianity are complicated cousins, but that certain liberal ideas make sense if you assume Christian premises about the universe. So I think that you are stuck a bit if you sort of try and if you try and maintain an edifice of human rights as a set of moral absolutes which must not be transgressed, but also say that the cosmos is a purely material landscape of contingency and accident. Those are ideas that fit uneasily together. And a lot of people hold both of them and feel okay about it. But I think there is a tension there.
So this is another question that bridges off of a discussion you were both having earlier. So what is the relevance of cultural Christianity to a healthy civic society? Do either of the speakers think it is better or worse for civic society to have cultural Christianity than a personally held belief?
Yeah, but that's that internal.
Maybe you could explain just for everybody what cultural Christianity means.
Well, you could be an atheist and still say, but I like the Judeo-Christian worldview as a foundation for Western civilization, and be done with it. But there, you're just kind of endorsing a set of beliefs that are setting aside the supernatural elements to it and go, I don't know about that stuff, but at least they respect people and treat people equally under the law or whatever, and that is the basis of democracy and capitalism and so forth. So that's fine. I'll go with that. Something like that, I guess.
Okay. Ross, what are your
Aren't
thoughts?
rights supernatural?
Well, I go for natural rights. They're maybe you do too a little bit.
Well, they're natural insofar as they are part of the order of reality, but they are, well, anyway,
but all right, even if there's a supernatural foundation and God granted us rights, if you don't have a strong military to protect your nation from invaders that will take away your rights, you'll lose your rights. So it really does come down to you got to have a military. I mean, that's it. These are our rights. This is our nation. And we're going to protect our rights wherever they're from. That's it.
You lose your, but the claim is that certainly the Christian claim would be that you still have those rights even in the breach, right? That the dictator, people in Russia who were murdered by Joseph Stalin had a right to life. He was just violating it. On the cultural Christianity point, I guess what I would just say is that it is, I think, a successful and healthy religious tradition yields a kind of penumbra of cultural affiliation that isn't necessarily pious or zealous, maybe doesn't believe in the supernatural elements, but that's sort of a normal order of things. You have a society where a bunch of people believe very strongly in a set of things, and another set of people are more loosely attached. It's really hard to just have the loose attachment without the core. And I think this is the dilemma of people who like something they call cultural Christianity, but are extremely wary of any kind of intense belief, is that over time, the cultural Christianity just gets more and more attenuated, whereas at some point, someone has to actually believe something, or else it just goes away. I'm not against, like, there are Christians who will say, cultural Christianity is bad because, it's not true religious faith and so on, and the only faith that matters is the really intense kind. That would not be my view. I think that I think cultural Christianity is a sort of effect of strong faith, and it's okay to have some people who are loosely bound and some people who are tightly bound. It's just really hard to have the loose binding without the tight binding somewhere.
These are great questions, by the way. Thank you for these. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but here's a good pragmatic one that I think has some interesting, potentially divisive elements for you too. Considering that religious-based books are among the first literary evidence of societies, why aren't they required foundational literary lessons in primary public education?
Well, actually, the earliest forms of writing are more accounting books, like Babylonian little tablets and so on. They're not really religious. After that, there's a lot of religious stuff. Well, because in public schools, we have the separation of church and state, and that's a good thing. Because what if it's not the Christian religion that's being taught to your kids? What if it's some other religion, and you don't like that? So for public schools, it's pretty clear no religions are going to be taught at all, unless you have like a class in comparative world religions or something like that. But private schools, so that's the solution. You have a Christian school and a Jewish school and an Islam school, whatever. You have your schools. Montessori, my kid goes to a Montessori school. Okay, so those are private schools. That's the solution to that.
Ross?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to the questioner's point, there's definitely an argument that that you can't understand like the Western literary tradition if you have never encountered the King James Bible, right? And this is something that the late Christopher Hitchens would say. So I'm not,
that's right.
taking some, some atheistic perspectives here, and in that sense, and I think it would be compatible with Michael's argument, you could absolutely have a public school English class that said, in addition to everything else we're reading as literature, we're going to read the first, few books of Genesis and one of the Gospels or something. And I don't think that would fall. Bible as literature classes don't necessarily fall afoul of the separation of church and state. It is, again, it gets into that sort of cultural Christianity question, though, right? Where over time, if you're just treating it as literature, there's an ebbing of the connection and a reduced urgency. But really, we're living in a time where there's a reduced urgency to people's encounter with the entirety of the world's literary traditions, and the decline of people encountering the Bible is part of that larger disconnection.
So let's extend it. This is not part of the question, but we're here at a major university, a large land-grant public institution. What role should religion play in the life of the university, and what approach and guidance would you give us?
Well, you're not a religious school. I mean, I went to Pepperdine University in Malibu. It was a Church of Christ school. I was a Christian at the time for 7 years, and so I was totally into it, and that's fine. They would not hire me now. I've talked to them because I would love to live in Malibu. It's a nice place to live, but they kind of have a mission. Like, our faculty are Christians. You're obviously not. So, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that, right? As a public institution, yeah, you have that problem. You can offer all the classes you want, and that's what you should do under religious studies or comparative world religions or mythology or whatever. And that's a perfectly fine thing to do. But if you took a stand, like, okay, just comparatively, if you said, we're a Republican school, we'd be like, wait a minute, we can't do that. We have to be for everybody. Yeah, right. You can't say you're a Christian school.
Ross?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can. I think the mission of a public university is certainly not compatible with having a religious test for who you hire. I think it is compatible with treating religion seriously as a zone of intellectual inquiry. And so having classes on religious subjects, departments that treat religious subjects seriously, and that don't just do so anthropologically, right? Where it's not just like, we're studying the sociology of religion. We're studying religion at a remove because of its effects on civil society. It's also okay to have classes where, students are arguing about whether God exists or not. And I think the more you do that, the more you will end up sort of by default having a few more religious faculty. Just, if you're hiring faculty because you want to have classes that take religion seriously, you'll get some atheists and non-religious people who take religion seriously, but you'll also get more religious people who take religion seriously. So I think there's a reasonable path for public universities to sort of be more engaged with religion and religious ideas that doesn't require sitting down and saying we're hiring 5 Catholics, 4 Calvinists, and 3 Zoroastrians, in our next
Pentecostals.
Hiring.
Pentecostals. Wait, and one last point on my little joke about the Republican. In fact, you really are, the academy across the United States, except for these religious schools, a very democratic academy. I mean, there are now we know from tons of polling data that the ratio, when I was in college, it was like 7 to 8, it was like 6-4, 60-40, liberal, conservative, then it's like 80-20. It's like 90-10 now. And there are some departments at Harvard and Yale, some of these places, where there's not a single conservative, not one, unless maybe there is, but they keep their mouth shut. And even that is bad, right? So there's no chance that these undergraduates are getting a balanced education on any particular hot-button issue. They are only going to hear the Democratic side of things, and that is not good. So I'll make the case for you. That is not good. They should hire more, diversity. Yeah, diversity of thought is the most important form of all diversity. Okay.
So, yeah, I've heard. We're going to pull this to a close now, and this is somebody said to me beforehand, why did you even write questions? They're just going to talk. And you all have demonstrated that really, really well. But also, thank you for entertaining our questions. And I want to pull this to a close by thinking about the future. And Ross, you mentioned ostensibly AI. And so I want to pull us in that direction. And so we've just lived through a couple of decades now of the rise of social media and its fracturing effect on us as a society. And now we have the rise of agentic AI. And Provost Bellamconda will often point to the Turing test, where it's less about can AI do our jobs? It's more about can we discern what is human and what is machine. That is the test. What does science tell us about what is the essence of being human? And what does religion tell us about what is the essence of being human as we think of the rise of this technology?
Well, I mean, maybe it was Ray Kurzweil or maybe it was Elon said, is there a God? Well, we're working on it. We're getting there. I got the engineers trying to figure this out, right? But in a way, if you think about what the Judeo-Christian God is, this omniscient, omnipotent being, and omnibenevolent, so that would be maybe a separate one for AI. But an AI would be essentially, relatively speaking, omniscient compared to us. I've made this argument for a long time that any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence that we would encounter would be essentially omniscient compared to us. The chances of them being just like 5 years ahead of us, which is one of the crazy ideas in the UFO community, that the spaceship crashed at Roswell and we back-engineered computer technology, right out of the, from the 1940s technology, like the aliens are just 5 years ahead of us, right? I mean, this is not, there'd be 5 million years ahead of us or so, which would essentially be omniscient. And then I kind of modified that to be any sufficiently far future human would be indistinguishable from God in terms of omniscience. And probably omnipotence. If you manipulate a genetically engineered life form, that would be like what God could do. And there's even, these are all sci-fi scenarios, but doable, that you could engineer a solar system. You can move planets around and move asteroids around. Well, that would be like what God would do. You could even create a universe. If universes are created out of collapsing black holes, like Stephen Hawking's model, then you could get a black hole to collapse on itself and create a new universe. That would be what God would do. Now, as for the omnibenevolence, all moral, I don't know. That's a harder one to know how you would. There you would be programming into the computer AI some kind of human values, unless it took on its own values and left us behind. I don't know what's going to happen there.
I mean, I think an essential quality of the Christian God, in addition to, yes, omniscience, omnibenevolence, and so on, is the idea that the Christian God is a mind that can know you and love you in the way that people want to be known and loved by other minds. I was having this conversation / argument with a very important AI person over a dinner recently, where we were talking about a world where he was saying, well, there's so many people who live alone and don't have an encounter, don't have someone to talk to, don't have someone to, be there for them. And in the end, AI, robots, all of these things can fill that void. And I don't want to say that they absolutely can't exactly. Like, I think it is totally possible that isolated and lonely people can derive some benefit from talking to an artificial intelligence. But I don't want to take it too far, because I think the thing that people want when they are lonely fundamentally is a relationship. Mm-hmm. And the assumption in a relationship is that there is someone like you, maybe bigger, more omni-everything than you, but in some way like you at the other end. And the religious perspective has always been that in the end, that's what, God is the other being of last resort, you might say, right? If no one loves you and you don't have a relationship with anyone, God still loves you. God knows you. God loves you. And I think the question hanging over the entire AI project is, you can create maybe something that acts as a God would in the universe in terms of, moving planets around and everything else. Are you creating something that can know people in the way that they actually want to be known? And if you aren't, then you haven't actually created a godlike being from the point of view of Christianity. You've created you've created an illusion, basically, a snare. And we'll see where all this goes.
But there, Ross, you're kind of still limited by our own technological limitations. We're being told that virtual reality will be indistinguishable from reality. That, like the holodeck on Star Trek, it's just like the real world. And that's coming.
Right.
I'm just reading this book on sextinction, that there's these sex bots that people are using that they're using actual flesh on their, now maybe it's 10 years away, maybe it's a century away.
No, that's coming.
But
that's
all coming.
But does the sex bot love you?
Well, okay, so how would you know, right?
Well, that is a very good question. No, look, my view is certainly that many people already feel this about AI models. People already feel that there is something there that knows them and loves them. I'm completely confident that if we got the machine god and it was benevolent and didn't wipe us out, but moved planets around and said nice things to us, lots and lots of people would worship that machine god. Some might say that some people in Silicon Valley have already devoted their lives to its service, right?
I think so.
But it is the essential question is still there, which is that true? Truth, the Michael Shermer book. Is it true that there is a consciousness in there that knows you? Like, your wife, you're talking about, whether or not there's a God, the happy husband or the happy wife has good reason to think that their spouse is a self like them, a consciousness like them, who knows them in the way that they want to be known. I don't think right now ChatGPT knows me in the way I want to be known, even if it could impersonate my wife over an extended period of time. So that's
Okay.
Okay, last question.
Oh, darn.
Last
I had
question.
a good joke. Okay, anyway.
Last question, and I'm going to start with you, Michael. Since you got to finish, you get the last word. You got the first word, you get the last word. As you think about this and you think to the future, and you've both described what may happen to us relative to the technology, i.e. me to the machine or me to what I think is the machine. What about me to you? What do you see in the future as you think about this technology rising? And this comes back to our social fabric, civic space. What is the pathway to keep us connected with each other? Is it science in your sort of moral progress argument, or is it religion? And you get the first word.
Not science. Like I go to the ichthyologist to decide what my position is on abortion or whatever. I mean, it's the body of knowledge accumulated over thousands of years by thinkers. Okay, that's it. Science, reason, rationality, the whole package. And it could be that there's elements of society, relationships that have nothing to do with that, and that's also okay. My spouse, okay. Do I love my spouse? Yes. Does my spouse love me? Yes. Do I require proof and evidence? Well, the line from Tim Minchin, the singer-songwriter from Australia. You know what you call love without evidence? Stalking. Okay, it's kind of bad. But really, I mean, if there's not evidence coming back, then, if you tell your spouse you love them 6 times in a row and nothing comes back, you might be thinking,
It's my whole freshman year of college.
Right there. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so, I mean, at some point, okay, I'm being told that the AI will be able to do all of this. It still feels to me, maybe because I'm a boomer, I don't know, that there's still a uncanny valley to be leaped across that AI is not able to do, but I'm being told it's coming. So I don't really know. I just think it's not the same. I mean, these sex bots thing, come on, this can't possibly be the same as the real thing. But I'm being told, it's coming. Okay, so I don't know the answer to your question. At the moment,
Ross, you get the last word.
I know.
Ross.
At the moment, we just need human relations.
How do we remain bound together as citizens?
I mean,
to say
something optimistic, I agree with Michael, that I think that there are fundamental goods that human beings share that it is impossible for me to imagine the AI and the robots in any plausible immediate timeline delivering in the same way. I think I worry about a lot of I think that there will be people under the shadow of whatever technological dispensation who are seeking community, who are seeking engagement, and who are seeking it from each other, from other human beings, in physical reality in a way that is distinct from the holodeck, whatever the political equivalent of the sex bot is, and so on. I guess what I worry about is for people who don't immediately find that, I think there already is a sense of kind of human obsolescence under these conditions. Like, if so many aspects of our humanity are sort of replaceable by machines, what is left? What is the reason, what is the reason for our existence? And that is where I think religion and religious arguments enter in, that it is having a sense of your place in the cosmos, a sense that, again, your existence was intended and that you are loved even if there is not another human being around you who is giving you love. That is, I think, a very powerful force that can stave off what I think is, again, going to be an otherwise powerful sense of, like, what is the point of all this, and aren't a lot of human lives disposable and under these conditions obsolete?
Well, please join me in a round of applause to thank Dr. Michael
you.
Shermer
Thank you.
and Ross Douthat.
Thank you, sir.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you.
A very, very thought-provoking conversation. Thank you very much.